Welcome to the Tesseract Podcast, where we unlock your power to innovate. Our mission is to empower airmen, connect them to resources, and accelerate change across the Air Force logistics enterprise. Specifically, our team works as an innovation accelerator assigned to the Air Staff Logistics Directorate, where we partner with airmen to foster a culture of innovation and maximize warfighter impact. My name is Dan, and I'll be your host for today. Today on the Tesseract Podcast, we're joined by Major General Edward Vaughan, Executive Director of the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell, also known as JRAC, where he leads the DoD's charge to deliver urgent capabilities to the warfighter faster than ever before. A command fighter pilot, polar airlifter, and combat veteran, General Vaughan has served across the globe in roles ranging from Arctic operations and NATO partnerships to Air Force safety innovation and space operations. He's also the first reserve officer inducted into the Air Force Safety Hall of Fame and a driving force behind a disruptive solutions process. We're excited to talk with him today about leading through change, accelerating acquisitions, and the future of warfighting technology. General Vaughan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Really appreciate you having me today, and I'm a big fan of Tesseract, so looking forward to this discussion.
We're glad to hear it, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your career and JRAC itself. Speaking of that, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your career, and how you made it to Major General?
Yeah, so that's a big mystery, especially to my own family. I think, and I share this with a lot of folks that I work with and admire, you get to a certain point in your career, maybe master sergeant or major, and you become really good at something. What that is could vary. It's not necessarily your primary job, but you usually become really good at something. You become a master of a craft. And then everything beyond that, and the rank can be plus or minus a little bit, but once you get beyond that, it's kind of gravy. And for me, totally unexpected. I never thought I had the demeanor to get past major, got in a little bit too much trouble. And so when you're asking me, tell me a little bit about yourself. So I will often err on the side of people and warfighters, especially. I really don't like extra process, red tape. I don't like to be bogged down. I really hate going to the DMV like we all do. But when you look at what can we do to change that, it comes down to people. The barriers that are out there, and we talked about theory of constraints a little bit earlier, these are all people problems. Processes are about people, paperwork's about people. And so if we take care of people and look after people, we can solve that problem. So going way back, I was a enlisted member of the Air Force Reserves, went through ROTC, did not get commissioned out of ROTC, instead switched over to the Air National Guard in my enlisted grade. And a couple of years later, they sent me to what used to be known as the Academy of Military Science. Really, it's Air Guard OTS. From there, I spent about a decade in part-time status, a traditional member of the Guard, and I had a civilian career working in manufacturing and engineering. And so my very first engineering job was with Troy-Belt rototillers, tilling up the earth and all that kind of stuff, welding those things together. And during college, my job was night shift welder for that company. So they were nice enough to hire me as an engineer. By the way, sing wage as a welder. So really just got a break there. Went on to work on locomotives, designing turbochargers for giant locomotives, manufacturing processes and that sort of thing. I was in the reserves in the New York Air National Guard. I got picked up with the 109th Airlift Wing, which flies the Ski 130s, LC-130 ski planes, both in the Arctic and Antarctica. And it was a great honor and privilege to be a navigator on that platform. It's one of the few remaining missions where navigators are not only absolutely required, but king of the mission. We do celestial navigation, pressure nav. You go on a completely different grid coordinate system, flying around the polar regions of the Earth, north and south. Most of the mission at that time was supporting science, but it's increasingly become defense related. As we've seen, changes in the way the Arctic ice is opening up pathways. But let me go fast through the rest of it. So that was the part-time side, civilian career. I want to highlight on that because spending the last 25 years on active duty, I find I'm one of the few of my peers that has any private sector background. So I went from there, went to the front seat, went from C-130s to F-16s, flew that for about a decade and a half. Ended up in some staff tours in the Pentagon, deployed for combat 3 times, deployed for disaster relief about 8 times. And again, each job along the way has been just kind of like a lucky stepping stone. I had some plans. I had some career ideas. None of it ever worked out. It's just sort of the next thing comes along and somebody says, you need to go do this. And so I really go from solving one problem to solving another problem. You could also look at it as I can't hold a job very long.
That's one perspective I guess you could take. It's definitely a wealth of knowledge, right? Starting from being on a line or designing new technologies or things like that on the ground, working with welders, working in an assembly line, and then that allows you to, I guess maybe empathize is the word, right? As you're then going through and designing things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the FIRST robotics competition, FRC, but I competed in FIRST robotics all through high school, and we build robots from scratch every year. We get a challenge, and then we made it to the World Championships 3 years while I was there. So we, being the man on the mill, right, on a milling machine making the part, allowed me to then go sit at the computer and design a part that then can be machined, right? And if you don't have both perspectives, you're probably not going to be effective in general, right? You might be effective 75% of the way.
No, that's exactly right. And that was one of the actual challenges we had at Troy Belt Rototillers. They would have the design engineers literally walled off from the manufacturing engineers. And so the design guys would come up with some design concept and throw it over the wall. And then we'd get together and have to figure out how to manufacture that thing. And it was really, at the time I got there, they had some good leadership that said, why don't we just take that wall down and work together and design for manufacture from the beginning? Now that's commonplace now.
Yep.
But if you talk, however long ago that was, 30 plus years ago, that was kind of a new thing in industry.
And it's funny how long, and this is totally off topic, but how long that concept took to get to software development and go from, development, security operations to DevSecOps, right? It's interesting how, different organizations or different careers will not look at other places and see how they're doing things, right? And try to bring it over and how long that kind of stuff takes.
Yeah, that methodology, that's, the stuff we're probably going to talk about today with JRAC, Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell, that's relevant to everything we're doing today for warfighters. Similar to the way they have a design engineer would design something and then throw it to the manufacturing and have them try to figure it out. We have done that. We're getting better, but we have done that in the past. We, the DoD, we would design weapon systems, procure and fire weapon systems, and then just give them to the warfighter. Not a lot of warfighter integration in the design up front. And if you think about human factors, even in the design side, they would design a device that's designed to have a human involved. But the human part of it would be added in as an afterthought sometimes, even airplanes, Now, compared to our adversaries, I think we do a lot better job, but there's a lot of room for improvement there. That's where I think a lot of innovation still yet to be at.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you hinted there a little bit about, and we mentioned earlier that your current position is executive director at the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. Many of our listeners are probably not familiar with JRAC, the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. Can you break down what the JRAC is, its mission, and then who it serves across the Joint Force?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I'll start with who we serve. We'll start with our customers, the combatant commands. So warfighters. We absolutely are committed to providing warfighters with those things they urgently need. Warfighters need a lot of things to fight the war. Logistics, you need maintenance, training, the whole piece. And a lot of that's built into the system. And a lot of that will be delivered over time on a schedule. And generally speaking, it's pretty good. We can criticize every one of those. We should. But overall, if you look at the way we employ, we have a pretty good model for that if we resource it properly. But things happen. The enemy evolves faster than we expected. There's an exponential change in technology that's occurring right now across the board. Our adversaries are taking advantage of that. Our adversaries don't have to go fill out paperwork in triplicate. They don't have to go to 10 review boards in the Pentagon. They can pretty well field things quickly, and they can do all their operational tests and evaluation in combat. And so it's important for us to understand how our enemy moves fast and how we can move faster. So that's what JRAC tries to do for warfighters. Despite our best efforts to acquire, deliver, provide, train, all of the stuff, all the equipment, all of the capabilities that warfighters need, there are going to be gaps. Sometimes the gaps are because we just didn't plan it quite right. That's usually not the case. Usually we think about these things and there are now warfighters involved and we do rotations and tours to get them there. What normally happens is something on the battlefield has evolved or changed. The threat's changed. Drones, loitering munitions, some of our smaller adversaries out there that now have access to large missiles. Things that have changed on the battlefield faster than our overall requirements acquisition and procurement system can keep up with. And so that's where JRAC comes in. Warfighters will articulate back to DoD. Normally they start with the Joint Staff. And let's take CENTCOM, for example. So U.S. Central Command will come together and say, look, here are some identified gaps. Some of these are things we can work on over time, but a couple of them we need to fill now. And those fill now are things that once they go to the Joint Staff and are validated, JRAC will act on that.
Okay, copy that. Can you talk a little bit about where JRAC sits at the Joint Staff or within the DoD? A lot of our listeners are probably very familiar with the squadron group wing structure, right? And maybe how that plays into their MAJCOM. But a lot of our listeners might not have an understanding of, how the Air Force sits within the DoD or how maybe you work for, the broad service as a whole.
Yeah, it's the largest of bureaucracies, and so I'm gonna tell you where we sit in the bureaucracy. It may not matter to a lot of folks, but I'll try to piece it together. Secretary of Defense has working for him directly all the combatant commands, so the warfighting generals. He also has the Joint Staff and he has the services. Generally speaking, the job of the services is to organize, train, and equip forces that they then provide to the combatant commanders. Joint Staff is kind of the process owner or the adjudicator of how all that works. Because if you think about all the combatant commands around the world, INDOPACOM, SOUTHCOM, NORTHCOM, EUCOM, add them all up, and including the functionals, SOCOM, TRANSCOM, those kind of things. Those combatant commands have a demand signal on people, capability, equipment, things they need to do their missions. And oftentimes the aggregate demand is greater than all of the forces the services provide. So the Joint Staff has an important role establishing what are the actual requirements. How do they spread across globally, not just one combatant command? And then how do we reconcile that with the force generation of the services, the organized training equip function? How do we match all that together? And it's never a perfect fit. As you can imagine, it's such a complex environment and it's changing. So it's not, you smack the chalk line today and tomorrow it's a little bit different. And so even when the Joint Staff does a great job of solving global force management, global force distribution, it changes tomorrow and they got to go back and resolve it. And so it's an ongoing, constant process. I say that because the way an individual squadron plugs into a group, plugs into a wing, plugs into a numbered Air Force, plugs into a MAJCOM, those MAJCOMs now plug into many of the MAJCOMs are also the component command for a COCOM. So Air Force's Northern is not only has an Air Force service function, they're also the component command for NORTHCOM, and they actually happen to be the component command for Space Command as well. So they're AST Space and AST North. If you look at USAFE, United States Air Forces in Europe, they have a very interesting mission. They're also it's actually called USAFE AF. So they are the component command for AFRICOM. So AFRICOM's air component is USAFE AF. And they're also EUCOM's air component command. So that 4-star, General Hecker right now, is in most cases, that'll be the CFAC as well. But he's the air component commander for EUCOM and AFRICOM, and he wears a dual hat as the NATO AirCom chief. And so again, under him are NAFs, wings, groups, squadrons, and smaller elements, flights, etc. And they all plug back into this. So whether you're in a garrison unit that may not have a nexus to a combatant command, in which case you will be force provided to the fight at some point, or you may be in garrison already force provided. You may be on that ledger, like USAFE or, for example, PACAF forward. And so that's how all that fits together. What the Secretary of Defense has, he has his own OSD staff, Office of the Secretary of Defense. In that staff, it's often called the Fourth Estate, which is not really important, but it's the civilian bureaucrats in the building. I say bureaucrat, not necessarily a bad way. That's their job, is to run things and to keep things on track. It can get a little bit out of control, and there's sometimes you get a little bit too much of that going on, and you got to cut back on it, and you got to streamline it. JRAC fits in that OSD staff, and specifically OSD is divided into these undersecretaries of defense. You've got comptroller, you've got personnel and readiness, You've got several others out there. The one we fall up under is called Acquisition and Sustainment, A&S. And so we report to the Secretary through the Undersecretary of Defense for A&S, and on a day-to-day basis, we plug into the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. So if you think about what we do, Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell, sound smells a lot like acquisition, and so we sit in OSD. What that means relative to the Air Force is the Air Force is one of three service departments: Department of the Air Force, which is Air Force Space Force, Department of the Navy, Marines in the Navy, and Department of the Army. We interact with those services. Our interaction with the services is usually to try to convince them or try to help them provide capabilities in an urgent manner to the combatant commands. And so if you think about all that, and the Joint Staff's job is to reconcile all this on a daily basis, we work very closely with the Joint Staff. In fact, Joint Staff is, for us, daily meetings at the AO, action officer level. And I have, a hot phone over to the generals and admirals that sit in the Joint Staff. So it's odd, as an Air Force officer working in that OSD environment, I very rarely get to interact with Air Force below the wing level. I enjoy it when I do, but it would be the same as talking to the Army at the brigade level and below, and talking to the Navy at ship commanders, and then all the functions they have, or a carrier strike group. And so we kind of look at the force structure out there as being very similar, and all that gets rolled up to the services, and then we can make decisions like that. So quite elaborate. Folks that are interested in that, I'm sorry you have that interest, but go ahead and do some research and you can look into all that. But that's where we're organized. So we sit in a place where we have direct liaison authority, known as DERLOF, with everybody in the DoD. And so, you ever heard of the thing, stay in your lane, don't get in my rice bowl, that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah.
Our lane is wherever our lane needs to be to support warfighters.
Copy that. When you talked about how your mission is to work with the different services to kind of generate a capability or feel the capability to provide, enable those warfighting generals to do what they need to do, right? That's kind of what we look to do, but at a smaller level, specifically focused on logistics, maintenance, force protection, and civil engineering, right, within the Air Force, is to work with those different wings and the innovators down at the squadron level and try to feel the capability that the Air Force can then provide, right? And so we're probably looking to provide that capability to an office like yourself without fully understanding the way it flows, right? And having that direct communication. But, much like Tesseract, you all are responding to urgent demand from the field. Can you share a little bit about how your team actually ingests and vets those requirements before, initiating a large-scale acquisition or a long-term acquisition, or however it works, and maybe even go a little bit into what these acquisitions might look like?
Yeah, so figuring out what warfighters urgently need, there's a little bit of an art to it, because all of us have, buddies, the bronet, if you will. We can call people. I know people that are forward from all the services. I can call them and ask them, what do you need? Or what are you seeing? And they're going to provide me a snapshot of their little part of the war, wherever that is, or their little part of the operation. Generally speaking, here's what we need at this FOB, or at this base, or on this ship. And that may not square up with what the combatant commander sees. The combatant commander may be aware of that, but he's also aware of these other needs at these other locations in that AOR. And so the prioritization of which ones do you want us to attack first? If we go out and do all that sensing on our own, in other words, we're going to get an incomplete picture. Here's the other thing. Combatant commanders own that risk. And so sometimes combatant commanders will move forward with an operation understanding that there's a risk because we don't have this particular capability, or we don't have all of it, we only have part of it, or I don't have enough folks on that part of the mission, or the training is lagging. Combatant commanders, when they're aware of that, make a risk decision. They can either mitigate it. Okay, let's get them training now, or let's get them some equipment. Or they may look at it and go, you know what, that is a part of the mission that I can take the risk. And so I charge you as the forward, tactical commander to execute that mission with the resources that you have. I'm going to own the risk of this part of it, and I will mitigate it in another way. So maybe a forward element can't jam the communications of the enemy. They don't have an organic jamming capability, and that they would report that back to us as an urgent need. But at the command level, they may be aware of that and have attached another unit that's going to do that jamming for them, maybe unbeknownst to them because it's at a higher security level. Copy. And so that's why it's really important. We want to hear directly from warfighters, and we definitely take it seriously, but then we'll circle back and get the context on it. And I tell you, it's sometimes when we circle back to the combatant commanders, and we usually deal, like I usually will deal with the 3-star DCOM or the 2-star chief of staff of that command. And if we hear something, hey, these units out here don't have X, Y, and Z, first thing I do is send it to those and go, hey, we're hearing from your frontline units, and I'll even ask the people, you want me to include your name or not? No, anonymize it. Okay, we have anonymously heard from some of your warfighters that they're not being provided this capability. And that's a conversation we'll have. Sometimes we'll get a reply, yep, we're aware of that. Here's how we're mitigating it. Feel free to pass this on to those warfighters and tell them to go back and talk to their chain of command who already know this. Okay, excellent. And we close an info loop in that case. But a lot of the time, you'd be surprised how often we'll get a note back from a chief staff or even a deputy commander. Hey, not tracking, not aware of that situation. Can you tell me more? And then as best as we can, we try to connect folks to their own chain of command. And we will, so what happens is we do this globally. Some people are like, well, you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. You're getting involved. I don't see it that way because our intent is to circle back and close these info chains. And recently, and Air Force Central is a great example of this, AFCENT. And you've got some fantastic leadership, but the dynamic of the situation with Houthis and with others, we won't get into specifics, obviously, but the dynamic of the evolving battlefield was such that it was hard to keep up with very narrow or specific tactical gaps. And so we got some feedback from frontline warfighters. Chain of command were generally aware, but maybe they didn't have some of the fidelity. We were able to close all that up. And then we went back to the commander and said, are any of these items you'd like us to act on? And we offer that to the commander. And in this case, the commander gave us a laundry list. I want help with these 5 things. And in a lot of cases for Air Force, we will circle that back to Air Force leadership, make them aware of it. A lot of cases they're already aware. They're already working on it. They got a solution pending. And we said, okay, we'll consider that kill chain closed. Air Force is already on it. They're already solving it. The engineers or the maintenance folks that are working on the solution just haven't conveyed that yet to the front line. So we'll say, recommend you inform the front line that this is coming, in 2 weeks. Coming. And then that one will be closed. Other times, it's something that may need some investment, or we may need to do a trade-off. And this is where it gets tough. If there's only enough money to pay for 4 programs, and to get these urgent needs, we need 7 programs funded. Where do you take money away and where do you put it in? And so that's our daily, it's not really conflict, but that's our daily challenge. It's how do you balance that and prioritize it? And that's where the joint staff comes in very handy. They help us with that.
Copy that. And so anyone who's worked in this space, right, working with in the requirements process or working in the acquisitions process knows that there's a lot of processes, right? Like you talked about earlier. And that's necessary because we have to be, good stewards of taxpayer money and purchasing the capabilities that we absolutely need, not just things that we think are cool or that we want, right? It's very important that we produce lethality and buy effective capabilities. But through those processes, how do you, operate and cut through that red tape at the JRAC?
So I'll go back to that. So I talked about sensing with warfighters. That's part of what we do. The main way, I'd say the preponderance of problems that we work and solve come to us from the joint staff. And so things work as advertised. So if everything works as advertised and comms are good, info flows up and down chain of command, you have mission command, we're all out there adhering to good Western warfighting principles, then everything would flow through the joint staff. And a lot of it does. So that frontline warfighter will pass that up the chain. The combatant commander 4-star, his or her team will then pass that into the joint staff. They have a way to validate and adjudicate it. They have a couple of instruments called JUONs and GUNs. So Joint Urgent Operational Need and a Joint Emerging Operational Need. And anybody listening out there, throw that into your handy-dandy AI gonculator and it'll give you a full readout. When those come to us validated, we have 30 days to act on them. And the very first thing we do in JRAC is get together a meeting of all the stakeholders, the services that are involved, the combatant command, could be DARPA, DIU, and others, and we assign a solution sponsor. So the Deputy Secretary of Defense has the authority to task a service or other organization to solve that problem and pay for the solution. And that's known as a solution sponsor, also known as a bill payer. So we'll get everybody together, and JRAC has delegated authority to assign that solution sponsor. And so the way we talk about how we do this on a daily basis, that's probably the most controversial and impactful thing we do. If, for example, if it came up the chain, validated by joint staff, that our warfighters in Southcom need some sort of an undersea device, something that works under the ocean, you would assume that would belong to the Navy. And you'd probably be right. Most of the time, that's going to be a Navy thing. Air Force, Army, they're probably interested. They have it. Certainly cyber and others have interactions around their sea. But generally speaking, it's probably going to be a Navy thing. So in that solution sponsor meeting, we'll ask for everybody to give their inputs. In that case, we'll go, Navy, this is probably yours. Yeah, we talked to our undersea community. They are working on some capabilities. Here's what we have. We think this one might be a good match. Not scheduled to deliver for 6 more years. Okay, well, we need this in 2 years or less. What can you do? And that's what our team gets out and works very closely with them. So when we all get together and do the solution sponsor meeting, we have knocked down as many of those barriers as we can in advance. And then the meeting is more of a discussion about formalities. What do you think the cost is? What's the timeline of delivery? Hey, COCOM, can you scale back your need just a little bit so we can deliver it faster? Are you willing to accept a capability that's not 100% perfect and iterate that once it gets forward? I know you guys deal with that all the time in Tesseract.
Absolutely.
Give me something to work with. Give it to the crew chiefs. Let them mess around with it, and they can iterate it to 100% from there, or 90%, whatever you need. And so that's a conversation. There is a list of due diligence that our engineers and our program managers require, and they should. A lot of that is by law. All these things have to be met. We really have 2 requirements in JRAC to field something. One is whatever we're fielding is not going to harm the operator, like it's not going to blow up and kill them or cause them to be harmed. In other words, it's not going to be something they turn it on and all of a sudden they become a big target and get shot. So as long as the product or the capability doesn't harm them or cause them to be harmed, that's due diligence point 1. Due diligence point 2 is that they accept the capability, right? And I get engineers and program managers, but the thing doesn't work. We're gonna be very transparent. We're gonna tell the warfighter that this thing works 42% of the time, but it won't kill you and it won't cause you to be killed. You want it. And sometimes they'll say, no, we need you to get that closer to 80%. For this particular mission, 42% ain't good enough. Got it. All right, program managers, engineers, get this thing to 80%. And then that starts a process. There's some investments, range time, whatever's needed to get that to that certain mark. Other times, frontline warfighters are like, yeah, we got nothing and we need something today. 42%, that's more than 0. We'll take it. And we've delivered things with actually lower effectiveness because the warfighters want to get it in their hands. They want to mess around with it. And the fact that we PCS people a lot, you may have frontline operators in the Air Force who their last tour was out in Edwards Test Center, right? Or they may have been in a program, or they may be part of the acquisition process, or they may have a background building robots, and they know how to operate machinery and mill and do things. And then you guys in Tesseract are enabling them at all levels to actually do this kind of work and get some sponsorship and top cover. And so with that, if you look at that frontline innovation and that frontline ability to iterate, really like a SpaceX going from Falcon 1 to Falcon 9, they were able to pivot and iterate. We count on that in the front lines, and that's why we try to cut through all of this. You'll have people that just come in and say, you absolutely can't send that because it's not perfect. And I go, they absolutely need it, and especially if it's not perfect. And then we go have a cup of coffee and have a conversation. So on a daily basis, our JRAC team are doing a lot of what you might consider touchy-feely things. We're trying to get buy-in. Because sometimes we may say, hey, it's not going to kill the operator, and it's good enough for them to iterate it to success. It's going to be meaningful to the operation. But somebody in the building may actually hold a legal card. There may be a legal or a policy reason, and that's the only person that can sign off on it. And so that's where it requires a lot of, hey, let's go for a little walk in the hallway. What's your favorite drink? Can I meet you later today? Can we go out and just, have a good discussion? And so that's why all of these things, when we assign solution sponsors, when we try to get people to yes, it's all ideally is collaborative. We have some options if it's not collaborative. And nobody wants to go there. We've had to try that a couple of times. We've taken it to the deputy secretary. And generally speaking, the deputy secretary can tell anybody in the building what to do. We had one recently where we had to go to the secretary because the people that were kind of slowing it down were extremely high level. And again, there was no malfeasance. There was no bad intent. There was people that just perceived that what we were trying to do, only that risk could only be accepted. That risk could only be adjudicated by the Secretary of Defense. So our highest chain of command member. And so we took that to Secretary and he signed off and Warfighter got some stuff.
Copy that. Yeah. I mean, I'm very excited for this period of time that we're in as a DoD where we are getting away from very specific billion-dollar acquisitions programs, right? We're still going to need, the B-21 and things like that, right? We're still going to need aircraft that are focused or very expensive pieces of machinery that are focused on a mission. But we're going to now surround that with a lot of very capable and low-cost systems that we can iterate on quickly, right? And we're seeing it a lot in the innovation ecosystem, around Tesseract and around the Air Force, where airmen are taking that approach, right? They're taking that fast iteration approach. Let me design something that I know it's not great. I know it's not going to solve the problem 100%, but let me get it out to that maintainer on the flight line. Let him touch a plane with it or talk about how he would wrench on an aircraft with it, right? And then we'll see. We'll go back to the drawing board. We'll take that feedback, right? I have a background. I hit on some software stuff earlier with the DevSecOps, but when I was out in Hawaii, me and a team of 4 others started up a software factory when the software factory boom was going on in the Air Force. Yeah. We developed Puckboard, the maintenance scheduling or the ops scheduling app for C-17s.
That's great.
And that was where I really understood the importance of user-centered design, right? Or warfighter-centered design, as we call it in the DoD pretty often, where you need to get that thing, whatever it is, in the hands of the user as frequently and as early as possible, because what they tell you is what matters, right? They need is what matters. And it sounds like, you're paving the way at the JRAC for everyone in the DoD to be able to do that, right? To be able to deliver effective capabilities and make sure that warfighter feedback is, taken into account and actually, valued and marked as important through the design process.
Yeah, there's a lot of, so the two big things I think that we end up running up against is trust and assumptions. And for senior level commanders to have an environment where your frontline warfighters are out there tinkering and experimenting and doing things, there has to be a certain level of trust. There also has to be some measure of assurance that our warfighters are going to be focused on the mission they've been assigned. It's very tempting, and I'm probably a worst case. It's very tempting to start tinkering around with solutions related to your mission, and then you stumble across other really cool things that are kind of related to the mission, but they're really cool, and I've got all the stuff I need to work on those, and then you start doing side projects. Some of those side projects yield great results for warfighters. A lot of them don't. And so there's a curb your enthusiasm part of that. And the question is, how do we take care of, human curiosity and human intellect, which we want to encourage, but at the same time, get all those people with all those different interests and ideas focused back on getting this mission done, right? And so there's kind of a time and place for all that. And that requires trust, because your senior level commanders have to trust your forward NCOs and your forward level squadron commanders to foster the right level of disruption and innovation in that unit. Too much crazy innovation all the time, good idea fairy kind of thing. It can be fun. You come in every day and it's very interesting, but you're not really moving the ball forward on the mission. Too much narrow focus on just the mission, and you're going to move the ball forward and you're going to become irrelevant because you're not adapting to the environment. So there's a balance. That's the trust part. The assumptions is the other one. You hit the nail on the head. 10 years ago, when we talked about space warfighting, the assumption was that the cost per pound per launch, and that cost of lifting things into orbit was so expensive that was the overriding factor that drove how we did things. SpaceX comes along and drives that cost down to 1/100th of what it used to be. And now that's no longer the long pole in the tent. Now getting your payload scheduled for a launch, there's so many things trying to go forward. That may be another issue. But That one has come down as an assumption. You go back and re-challenge all your assumptions and go, where do we actually really need to be investing our time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe in the next part of the conversation, we'll take a little bit of a step back about specifically JRAC's role and the interactions you have, but take a little bit more of a look over your career, right? I've only been in the Air Force 10 years. I have a bit of a picture. You have more of a picture than I do on how maybe this is changed over time. Acquisitions is a beast in the Air Force or in the DoD, especially if you're not familiar with it, right? Most of our warfighters are not familiar with it. They're on the ground doing their job, their NOS or their AFSC that they're tasked with. They know how to fix their aircraft or their ship or their vehicle, right? And they know how to be a warfighter, but they don't know how to acquire the things they need, right? Or get something across the finish line. How over the course of your career have you seen acquisitions change? When you were, maybe you could talk a little bit about the times you were in the field and needed something, and then maybe how that's changed to now and what JRAC can do for those airmen or those warfighters.
Yeah, so if you count all my service, which I do, it goes back to reserve time and everything else. The first time I put on the Air Force uniform was in 1985, and so this September will be 40 years wearing the Air Force uniform. Now, I really didn't start doing continuous active duty tours until the late 90s. So next year will be about 30 years aggregate of active duty time. But perspective goes back further. And early on for acquisition, even major acquisition programs, I saw that we had a lot of companies out there, and this gets back to our defense industrial base. A lot of companies out there, there wasn't just the big five, right? The big primes. There were a lot of companies that had dual use, multi-market, multi-purpose. They would do commercial and DoD, and it was kind of a diverse ecosystem of companies to deal with. There was a movement in the 90s. There was a famous event called the Last Supper. You can throw that in the AI too and look at that, where we took all these companies and said, it's just going to be these. Here's the winners. Anybody else want to win, you got to go through them. And that solved a whole bunch of problems for acquisition. But then it created a whole bunch of others that we didn't know about till later. And it comes down to risk. There's a over-reliance on this notion of firm fixed price contracts. So this is how I've seen it change over the years. Firm fixed price contract sounds like a great idea for the taxpayer. We're only going to pay X amount, and we're going to put the financial risk of cost overruns and contract mods and development failures. We're going to push that risk onto the private company. Well, companies, especially publicly traded companies, most of the big ones, they have to answer to shareholders quarterly. And so if we do a firm fixed price that puts them into a situation where to make all the changes needed to deliver that capability, they're going to lose money. And sometimes they'll go in and bid knowing they're going to lose money. The only way, and they have a fiduciary legal responsibility to their shareholders that they don't have to the customer or the employee, which is a surprise to a lot of folks.
We could thank the Dodge brothers for that one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Well, so these companies, though, they will take those losses and they will, by definition, because they have a fiduciary responsibility, they will spread that across many quarters. So what does that look like for the DoD? Delayed delivery. And so, yeah, we're getting that capability for that firm fixed price, but it's 5-10 years over schedule. And everybody's like, oh, the companies are corrupt. The companies are actually meeting their legal obligation to spread those losses across quarters. Now, I'm saying this is how, I consider myself an average acquisition person in the ecosphere. I don't have an acquisition background. People much more knowledgeable, and they understand this, and they're working hard to address these problems. But I think when people say, well, the answer is firm fixed price, there's more nuance than that, because that leads to other problems. Well, the answer is just have 5 primes and everybody else plugs into them. That solves some problems, but it creates a whole bunch of others. So back to the original question, what I've seen is through our standard, if you will, our traditional process, we have a lot less options available to us than we used to. There seems to be less flexibility and less adaptability. Congress has caught on to that in the last few years and provided tools to the department, other transaction authority, One of the things JRAC does is we manage the urgent capability acquisition pathway for the acquisition community. So people that want to do things very quickly. There's a middle tier of acquisition out there that's kind of how do you rapidly prototype, how do you rapidly deliver a small quantity, and then you go back through a major acquisition program to scale it. To your point earlier, the $1 billion programs, there's a certain type of weapon that we need that's actually pretty reasonably cost. We use it to shoot down drones, and it only costs $30,000 to $40,000 a round. And so you're like, well, that could be a smaller program. That could be lean, fast, and a tight loop. And so then you ask all the combatant commands, hey, this is a cool weapon that does a good job, and it's easy to use, and it's, supply chain's good. How many do you need? And the numbers should, because they're looking at their ops over the next couple of years. And so pretty soon, something that's actually could be produced by a small company, could be produced quickly, has a nice supply chain. When you scale it across a global power like the United States, and you scale it globally, now you're talking $1 billion program again. And so sometimes it's not that the program is so complex and exquisite that it's $1 billion. It could be a low-end, low-cost thing, but everybody wants it. So now you just got to scale it from a quantity standpoint. By the way, that's an easier scale because you could tell Congress, we need $1 billion and we're going to get, 100,000 of these things. I'll forget whether it makes sense versus we need $1 billion, we're going to get one of this thing. And then you got to explain it a little more. So there's a different narrative. But when you talk about cost and when you talk about scale of programs and size of programs, we're still going to get there just because we're a global power. I don't think I answered your question at all, but I had fun ranting.
Yeah, that was great information. That's a lot of, I think the whole point of a podcast is storytelling, right? Being able to provide experiences that you've had related to the question, even if it's not a specific answer to the question. So
I'll jump right in real quick on one thing else. You mentioned the disruptive solution process. So this was 3 combat deployments. One of the ones I did in 2004, we stood up a project called Project Black Mountain. And what we were trying to do is connect all of the tactical data links in theater. Okay. And again, I was the least knowledgeable of the guys involved, but probably knew some folks, and it really comes down to who you know, right? So I knew some of the maintainers that understood tactical data links. I knew some of the folks in the command team that could get me onto the general's calendar. I knew some of the people that worked at various bases, and so we could have access to set up our antennas. And that's where we pioneered a lot of this in combat. And back then, in 2004, there were a lot less checks and balances on things you would order through the supply system. Now you got to have 10 people plus their parents sign off on whatever it is you're going to order. Back then, you could go to almost any base, ask for the quartermaster or the supply office, and go, if you have the NSN number, national stock number, you can go in their system and order 10 of them, and it eventually would show up at that base. And we weren't really sure where the money came from or who paid for all that. Now, I now know how all that works, but when I was at that time, a one each major runner on the theater trying to set these things up with a team, we just said, hey, if we type in 10 of these things, they show up.
Interesting.
That's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you have to have a PhD in budgeting and economics to basically get it apart.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that trying to piece together something that provides that type of capability for a combatant commander or a warfighter, right? That technology is probably a little more tightly controlled too, in the current theater, the current day.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, copy that. Well, now I know how everyone would get pallets full of rippets in the desert back in the day.
Yeah, and if you think back to the way things were, and if you look at talk to the folks that are Vietnam veterans, I hang out with a lot of Vietnam vets, and their whole supply chain was even more skewed. And you go back and watch the TV shows like MASH. Remember Radar O'Reilly?
Yeah.
He would get anything that camp needed by bartering. So he would end up with a truck full of things he didn't need, a truck full of ice cream makers. And he would put that off in a warehouse, knowing that somebody would come along that needed ice cream makers, and they would have something he needed and he would trade it. You don't see a whole lot of that now because we're on stock rally things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and having a network is key to operating in any organization. Right. We take some pride in our what we call our L&O network for our liaison community. It's about 1,300 members strong right now, and it's just warfighters out there in the field that are communicating, right? Hey, I'm working on this project. Is anyone interested? Oh, I'm interested, and 10 people will jump on, right? So, but if you don't have a network, you're going to be trapped in a silo of thought or a silo of capability.
That's exactly the point. I think if you heard of this book called Start With Why,
I have.
Simon Sinek, I think maybe. Great book, right? And Start With Why is important. What we've learned in JRAC is that's a nice question, but the most important question for us is start with who. There are organizations that we're supposed to work with because on paper they do this function. And the reason it's come to JRAC is because that organization's not doing that function. And so we get to get, as a team, we'll get together and go, does anybody here know anybody that works over in that office? Yeah, I know this guy. He's he's a program manager over there. Okay, great. Let's bring him over to JRAC. What does he like to eat? What does he like to drink, right? We'll bring that person in and we'll sit down with them, have a conversation, get to know them. But it starts with who, because I believe that it's the people in the organization that are going to get the solutions. Organizations can be assigned a mission or assigned a function and may or may not execute it very well. But if you get the right people involved, even on something that's a tertiary mission, you can probably have some success.
I couldn't agree more. Who, every project that we start now starts with the who, starts with maybe not developing an in-depth one, but starting with a loose persona, right? Understanding who that person is, what they do, and what their skills or lack of skills are, and how you can fill those gaps.
And for the listeners out there, let me encourage you, if you haven't already figured this out, the people you don't get along with in other organizations, or sometimes that's the key to success. That person, it's okay to not get along. It's okay to disagree on things, but make a very rational assessment. I really don't like being around that person. However, they get this thing done better than anybody in the DoD, and they're really good at it. And so find a path to yes with that person, even if you don't like them.
Absolutely. That's a great leadership tidbit that I think a lot of people can derive value from. And, with a leadership journey that's spanned the cockpit, Antarctic operations, North American defense, Air Force safety, just to name a few. How has that breadth of experience shaped your leadership philosophy, and how has that philosophy helped you lead the JRAC in developing timely and effective solutions to the warfighter?
I think it comes down to loving people you work with. So I love my fellow warfighters, even if I don't like them. You know the difference there? And I'll tell you this, that's underrated. And it took me a long time to get to that point, to where I understood that's what's really going on here. Because if you can appreciate, and when I say love, I'm talking about the way you love your country, the way you love your mission, the way you love what you do, the way, if you can love those folks, that network that you're talking about, and you approach it from that standpoint, then the things they do that you don't like, or the things they say you disagree with, are just data points. And you can collect other data points. What is it about the person? Okay, I don't like that. I don't like what he says. I don't like his opinion on these matters. We disagree on those things. What is it about that person, though, that I can find value in? Or maybe I'm the problem. That's the other thing. In the C-130 community, we often don't fly with hard crews. In other words, when every mission you fly in the C-130, it's a different pilot, co-pilot, navigator. Back when we have navs on all these, flight engineer, maybe 2 load masters. So you have a crew of 5 or 7, depending upon the mission. And so you would show up to the ops desk and say, oh, I'm on the schedule with these folks. And there's a saying that every single airlift crew, C-17 similarly, fewer people, every airlift crew has at least one jerk on the crew. And so if you show up and you look at the list and you're like, you don't know who it is? It's you.
Absolutely.
Right? And you have to allow for the fact that you're the jerk on the crew. Damn, I'm the jerk today. And if you're in a squadron where it's just like everybody, then it's very possible that you're the only a-hole in the squadron. And so you want to take a look at that and consider it. I'm not saying change anything you're doing. I'm just saying be aware that you may be the guy. And so when I encounter people, this is a leadership thing I've learned over the years. If I encounter an office or an organization or a person at any level, that there's friction or we're not aligned or something's not right, first thing I want to do is step back and make sure I understand how I'm reacting to that. There's a little bit of a stoic principle there. One of my mentors is currently the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I don't hear from him a lot these days because he's obviously very busy, but I got a lot of mentoring from him that I've been trying to pass on to others now. And one of those is to do some daily readings and daily writing. And those are sometimes self-reflective. In fact, they're often self-reflective. I can't change the environment. I can't change what happens on a day-to-day basis, but I can always change how I react to it and how I respond to it. And that's kind of one of the overriding principles I learned from General Kane. And I take that with me, and I share that with others, and hopefully sharing it with many people now. If you want some reading on that, Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, that was one of the first books I bought for the entire JRAC team and handed that out to everybody so that they could enjoy reading that as well. And there are others out there. There's another great book out there called The Obstacle is the Way. But I will tell you, this ties into networking, this ties into leadership, it ties into dynamics, because I think, to me, red tape and bureaucracy are people problems. We could call them process problems, but process is about people. And all those steps that we have to do, that I might consider those 5 steps useless. I got to do these 5 checklist items before I can get to the win. These 5 things are absolutely useless. Well, each of those 5 things probably has a person behind it that cares deeply about that thing. And you got to put in the time to find out who cares about that step and why. And sometimes it's an aha moment. Ooh, you're right. I probably ought to do that step. Cybersecurity, right? Or something that I just wasn't in my cross check. Or sometimes it's like, I could see why that person thinks that's a big deal. For this particular case, I don't think it is. And we go have a conversation with them, and maybe they'll sign it off. And we'll get through it quickly. That's one way you cut red tape. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but it all, to me, stems back to people. It stems back to more important than me mastering myself. Mastering your craft is really important earlier. We talk about that. You become an expert at a certain level. The one thing that I think people struggle with, and I'll say that, I'll own it. I'll say I struggle with it. There's a lot of things. I've degree in engineering. I've flown much different airplanes. I've been involved in different missions. I've got staff jobs, all kinds of functions that I've done. The hardest thing on a daily basis is mastering myself. Being able to wake up each morning and understand what my own limits are, how to break through those limits, how to be self-reflective and be of value to my team. Instead of asking what my team's going to do for me, what is it I'm going to do for the team? I also think that's the way you build your network. A lot of folks get towards the end of their military careers and they want to start quote unquote networking for their civilian job next. And they kind of wait till the very end, the last minute. And then their idea of networking is calling everybody they know and asking for a job. I think if you dig your well before you're thirsty, that's one of the quotes I have in my office, dig your well before you're thirsty, which means invest in that network before you need it. Be a good member of the network. It's just like being a good member of the team. Do things for others. What can you do to help others? And then, again, know yourself and how much time, how much energy do I want to put into that, because I got to manage my energy.
That was a very unique answer, right? I think that's the first time we've talked. I've heard the word love talked about on the podcast, but in that context, Rick, about maybe maybe we don't hang out on the weekend, but I'll do anything that I need to do to make the mission happen next to you, right, on the flight line or downrange. I think there's a very healthy wave going over society today, or maybe it's the DoD community, of introspection, right? Being introspective, maybe a little bit of extreme ownership going on, right? My team's probably sick of hearing me say that, but you're willing, but I love that concept, right? Of always just thinking, let me just flip this around to myself real quick, right? Things aren't going right here. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing that is affecting the situation negatively, that is keeping me from reaching the goal that we're trying to reach here, right? And maybe once you do that, you realize it's not you, right? Maybe you're not the jerk on the crew that time. And I was a flying crew chief on C-17, so I know all about there's a jerk on this. Oh, absolutely, yeah. But yeah, a little bit of introspection there to just look and say, hey, maybe I'm the one, right? Maybe I'm the one that is holding this up. Maybe I'm the bureaucracy and I don't even know, right? I think maybe if all the good-hearted patriotic Americans that work here in the Pentagon that are trying to get the mission across, do a little bit of that, right? Do a little bit of introspection and say, hey, maybe I'm the red tape here. I think the DoD is just going to move at lightning speed if we can all take that approach of, moving towards a mission because we're all doing it together.
Yeah, that gets back to that. Start with who. Start with who is can be good, bad, and indifferent, but it's a data point. Back to Jocko Willink, though. Huge fan of Jocko Willink. Big fan of Tier 1 soft community and all those guys. One of the things I see is you look at, and I've heard some of them talk about hate, and hate's a tool. They'll use it sometimes. Generally speaking, those of us that go into harm's way, those of us that pull triggers, as a fighter pilot, I pull a trigger, I cross into enemy territory. My job sometimes is to kill people and break their stuff. If I'm having to do that, other levels, diplomacy, everything else has not gotten our objectives done. So we're going to go in and get it this way. I don't think I've ever done that out of hate. Most of the time you just do it out of discipline. You're disciplined, you're trained, you're doing your mission, you're doing your job, and you go home and think about it later. So you're not really assessing how you feel about it at the time. You just getting the job done. But I will tell you that if you talk to, I hang out, like I said, hang out with Vietnam veterans, people that fight for our country often fight out of love for what's behind them, what they're defending, not hate for what's in front of them. You can have both. I don't think the hate's particularly useful. It could be useful sometimes to get you fired up, but generally speaking, what endures, and it's not just people behind you, it's love for the people next to you. So that's when we talk about that. If you talk to the Tier 1 soft teams, those guys are ruthless to each other, interpersonally, but it's kind of better in humor. Underneath that, those guys love each other. SEAL teams, I'm not going to speak for them, but they can't do what they do at that level without loving each other. And when I say that, that's on it is a deep, hardcore, mission-oriented kind of love. The kind of love that you punch a guy in the face because you love him so much, that kind of love, when needed. And so that's where, Jocko Willink and those kind of guys, I really appreciate when they say things in public, when they write books. I bought some discipline books for my daughter on extreme ownership, and she loves those. And I just think that's, like you said, that trend towards taking a look at why we do things and what makes us tick and how we're actually connected, that's going to win the wars. That's going to make us move faster.
Couldn't agree more. I think we're going to probably roll into a totally different topic here. Okay, with the next question. But I really valued that conversation. Yeah.
All right.
Those are some notes that I'm going to take forward, and I'm probably going to re-listen to this a couple times afterwards. I'm actually going to start here with a sub-note that I wrote here. You have a lot of experience throughout your career with things like space operations, polar missions, future technology, right? You're here working at the highest levels of the DoD, working on rapid acquisitions of advanced technologies. Where are the aliens?
Oh, you mean the weather balloons? Is that...
okay.
We got some about weather balloons?
Yeah, weather balloons. Yeah.
Because it's really just weather balloons.
Yes.
So I'll tell you this. I think aliens walk among us. And I don't know, when I say alien, I don't know if they're from another planet, another dimension, or they're just somehow, some of their brain cells got unleashed. Mm-hmm. But if you look at some of the amazing innovators we have, like Steve Jobs, like Nikola Tesla, go back and look what that guy was doing. Sir Isaac Newton. I've learned about this entire group of physicists, mathematicians, and metaphysical geniuses from the higher altitudes in India. If you go way back, right? And I don't really understand it, but all the calculus and physics and stuff, it goes back to some of those guys. Look at pyramids around the world, how things are built. Elon Musk. I mean, that really, how many multi-billion-dollar companies and innovations can one person create, and tens and hundreds of thousands of people employed, and actually a single individual moving the needle on a nation's GDP? I mean, that's, whether or not you like the guy personally, I think is irrelevant. That guy's changing things. So I'm not going to accuse him of being an alien, but I think others have. But we just have these among us, walk these people that do amazing things, and have these amazing insights. And so, I don't know. I think that there may be some alien stuff going on. I don't know for sure.
That's a really interesting answer to that question, right? I like the spin, but it's interesting just from the idea that we're always looking to the sky, thinking what could be out there. Yeah, not looking at how there are incredible people here on the ground that are doing good things, really incredible things every day.
That's right.
Changing the world.
Well, if it helps you to think that they've come from Alpha Centauri and that's why they're so good, then do that. I think what, to your point, is appreciate the folks we have. And back to the earlier point, even if you don't agree with everything, you don't like everything, what is it that they're doing and what is it about what they do that you can find value in and you can get behind? Let's find that common ground. Because I think we're mostly related, not unrelated.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll go back to the main question. Okay. So the landscape of conflict is evolving rapidly, right? We talk about how quickly things are changing, and the pace of that change is faster than I think it's ever been before. I'm sure there are plenty of stories from World War II and things like that where things were changing fast, right, on the ground. But it's at all levels now that the iterative pace is just wildly fast. During your time with JRAC, what types of emerging technologies have you encountered that you think will have the greatest impact on the warfighter?
So there's some obvious ones about weapons and sensors and fuses and things like that. Drones is an easy answer, and autonomy. But let's peel that back a little bit and let's look at some of the enabling technologies. I think energy is not talked about enough. You guys that live in the A4 community, energy is one of your missions. But I think your average warfighter out there, until they don't have energy, until they don't have electric power, they just kind of take it for granted, generally speaking. There's a few out there that are getting after it. When we look at what's available to us now, the United States is really, if you look at our natural resources, we're one of the only, maybe the only country on earth that could be completely self-sufficient. Everything we need, energy, food, natural resources, including rare earth minerals, which by the way are not rare, they're just rarely worth the trouble. We have all of that, especially kind of Alaska and the islands. It's all there. The barriers are self-imposed. And sometimes for good reason. Hey, we can't have you digging that stuff out of the ground in the way you dig it because it's an environmental disaster. Okay, well, let's improve the way we dig it then. Let's improve those technologies. And so when you look at the evolving technologies that are out there, small modular reactors, nuclear power, absolutely a game changer. That's clean energy. So there's people that care about the effects of energy on the environment. They can get behind that. There's people that care about sustainable, reliable energy that doesn't depend on other countries. They can get behind it. They're usually two different groups. And from a warfighting standpoint, gone are the days when we're going to fight a peer nation and be able to have thousands and thousands of ships full of liquid fuel. That is just not feasible. That creates a lot of targets. Those are environmental disasters waiting to happen if you care about that. But more importantly, you won't be able to get that fuel forward. So what can we do to actually produce the fuel we need in situ? Whether it's island hopping, whether it's at a forward base, whether it's along the coast, whether it's on ships. The Navy cracked the code a long time ago with the Navy nuke program. You've got nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines. The Russians, who we can argue care a lot less about environmental impact than others, not only have nuclear-powered submarines and ships, they now have civilian fleets, nuclear icebreakers, nuclear cargo ships, and nuclear-powered fuel transport ships. So if you can imagine a ship that transports liquid natural gas, and liquid natural gas requires a lot of cooling, which means a lot of power, and their ports are primarily in the north, in the high north. And so sometimes due to ice and freezing, they've got to take longer routes and they can't afford to burn all that diesel and whatever else they may run. They've gone with these nuclear powered ships to move fuel, which is one of their main exports. So just looking at the technologies that are out there, I would say energy is a focus. Quantum, we have got to get our encryption under control in this country. We have great encryption right now. We can send messages, we can move data, we can pass information, we can manipulate it without the enemy getting in. We are going to have a rude awakening when quantum starts becoming ubiquitous and our enemies are able to go back and data that they'd captured years ago, they can now crack the code on that encryption with quantum. We're already starting to see some of it. Anybody that wants to do further reading, not endorsing a specific company, but Microsoft just published in the last couple of weeks a quantum methodology paper that JRAC found great use in after we had some people explain it to us. So we had to have, there's a little bit of background required to read it, but I would encourage you to read that, drop it into your AI calculator and have it, pull out some salient points. And there's other technology out there that I think is really important. I think the biggest thing I've seen are companies, though, that are willing to adapt, improvise, overcome. They're willing to be agile. And government, frontline acquisition contractors and others are becoming like-minded, and the plasticity of mindset is really going to be helpful. So the methodology, I think, is just as important as the tech itself.
Copy that. Yeah, and I asked these problems or these questions, one, because I'm very interested, right, in a lot of these emerging technologies that are coming out. I'm learning more about them, and I'm always just interested to hear what others are working on, right? But one of the things we do at Tesseract is to try and charge the field with solving problems that are important, right? With our annual Ether Sprint competition, we, rather than like a normal innovation competition where everyone submits whatever they're working on, we challenge the field with 5 challenge questions that we work with the staff to generate and say, here, these are the problems we're facing, right? Coming out of exercises, tabletop exercises, Corona, things like that. Here's the problems that the Air Force needs to get after. We want to hear how you think we should do it, right? Or how you're already doing it. And then we go from there. So I think a lot of airmen out in the field are going to hear these and start thinking, how can I try to get after some of these technologies, right? Or how do I think I can implement those technologies at my level, or I would utilize them here?
There's a guy named Peter Diamandis who came up with the X Prize way back 30 years ago, whenever it was. And it was similar to that. They would put one big question, one big problem. They would throw it out there, and whoever solved it would get $1 million prize. What they were really doing, though, was acquiring intellectual property, because they would have 10 or 20 companies submit entries. And one of the caveats of entering a contest is all of the entries now get to be used by the organization. So for $1 million, they got ostensibly $20 million worth of great ideas and proven innovation. And so that X Prize concept, I thought, was really good. DIU uses that concept right now. Something you guys have something similar, maybe with a list of problems. And I got to meet Peter Diamandis thanks to the United States Air Force. I was part of a Blue Horizons program, 2008 at Air University. And as part of that, they said, well, you can take a couple of TDYs to do some research. And I got turned on to the Singularity Summit. So talk about aliens again. You got Peter Diamandis, you've got a couple other great thinkers out in Silicon Valley. And I went out there and attended a conference with those guys and met them. And so they seem just like us, by the way. I mean, I couldn't really tell they were from Alpha Centauri.
Yes, I hear it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Hard to tell. Well, we have some rapid fire questions. And,
all right. We'll go for the rapid fire round. I'm ready.
So I think we have 8 or 7 here. So if you were an Avenger, which one would you be?
I am an Avenger. I am Quicksilver.
Okay. Come to that. I think that's the first one on the podcast.
Yeah. Quicksilver does things fast, gets things done. I just like the approach of Quicksilver. I also think Quicksilver was the first one killed. But it's okay. We can resurrect. It's Avenger world. You can come back.
Yeah. Multiverse. You pick
1 or 2 range. So there you go. You're all set. Yeah.
Your favorite musical instrument is what?
I could give something really outlandish, like the lute. I would say it's the guitar.
Okay. Do you play?
I do. And I just, I don't play well. I don't play well enough to like my music as much as I like others, but I really love guitar.
Roger that. I've brought this up on other podcasts, but I have a guitar. I had multiple guitars in my life. I've strummed it with my fingers on the frets. I wouldn't call it playing or what it's doing, but I'll get there someday.
You and I could have a band of similar skill level, it sounds like.
Perfect. Yeah. That sounds good. We can do something down here in the hallway one day.
Yeah, there you go. It was, yeah.
iPhone or Android?
I have an iPhone. I like the way the Android does, open API, plug and play and all that, but I have an iPhone.
Okay.
Mostly for security.
Roger. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Trek Wars.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm on vacation with my family. Where are you going?
We are going to go, my family's going to probably want to go to Europe, but I'm going to want to go to Hanoi. So I took a trip to Vietnam. So go back 100 years ago, and Paris was where, Ernest Hemingway and Picasso and all the artists were hanging out, right? Paris was like that new thing. I think Hanoi is the new thing. And by the way, a recent, I don't know if it's a Pew Research or Gallup poll, but one of those global surveys of all the nations in favorability of the United States, Vietnam was number 1 on earth with an 84% favorability rating for the United States. I think Hanoi and Vietnam has a case to be like that Paris of our age. where all the art, innovation, cool stuff's going on. Those guys are capitalists.
Yeah.
They have that big red flag with the gold star, and they talk about communism. That's fluff. Those are hardcore capitalists, man. Those guys want to earn a buck. They want to hustle. They work hard. They're smart. They're into innovation, and they love America. So there you have it. That's where I'm going on vacation.
Sounds like my next vacation.
There you go.
What is your favorite movie?
Yeah, I thought you would ask that. I got a lot of them. I like Patton a lot. I like Fight Club. There's a lot of movies. I like all movies. My favorite movie is any movie I get to watch with my family, sipping a very good bourbon. That becomes my favorite movie. And some of those movies suck, but the environment is worth it.
Yeah, that's all that matters, right? Is who you're with. Yeah. What would you say your superpower is?
Superpower, foresight.
Okay.
Strategic. I can't see the future, obviously. I don't, I think some people can, but I can't. And this comes from being around long enough. And frankly, it comes from failing a lot. And I have failed a lot. We didn't get into that. I don't really like to get into it, but it's important. And what that's allowed me to do is look forward and see where the not failure is. I see a path. And so that foresight allows for a little bit of vision, allows for a little bit of leadership, and then you can push things in the right direction.
Copy that. And I mean, the majority of the time you can't have success without failure, right? You couldn't have gotten to the place that you were at today if you didn't fail along the way and have some introspection, learn from it, and then you
learn the most by failing. Yeah, I don't like it, and that's why I learn. There's a theory of adult learning. Like if you teach platform instruction for the Air Force, they'll put you through a week-long class on how to teach adults. And one of the most powerful ways for adults to actually learn things is to have an emotional experience associated with it. Can be positive or negative. My case is usually negative. Fall flat on your face, fail at something. I learn a lot, and I don't like learning that way, but that's what works.
Cover that. Well, sir, we appreciate you coming on today. You've dropped a lot of insight today, right? I've learned a lot about the JRAC, how you fit into the DoD's mission, right? Yourself, your journey, some of the stops you've taken along the way, and the experiences you've had. If you could leave behind one piece of advice or lasting insight for airmen or our joint service members in the field, what would it be?
Dig your well before you're thirsty. And that's all about people. So what I would say is have a network. In other words, have a team. You don't have to call it a network, call it a team. Have team you, whoever that team is. Start with the people that already love you, take care of them, and then find other people. And remember, you got to love them first. You can't just expect them to start loving you, and build that team out. And then with that team, you're going to be able to do things. So dig your well before you're thirsty. Don't wait till you need it. Do it when you don't need it.
Copy that. Well, I hope everyone listening can take that and implement that. I think us at Tesseract, we try to live by that motto, every day, building a network of individuals who can really get after the mission, but not wait until we need them, right? It's all of us in it together to get after this. So thank you very much, General Vaughan. We really appreciate you being here today.
It's great honor. Thanks for having me, and I love me some crew chiefs.
Any references to trademarked, copyrighted, or protected products or services, such as books, movies, or businesses, are used here for the limited purposes of educational and professional development of Air Force Airmen. If you have any questions, please contact us at www.tesseract.af.mil.